When you look within the legislation as to the definition of personal injury, it actually defines it, specifically defines it in the law of this land. One of the definitions is an infectious disease. It's there in the legislation. These workers have an absolute legal protection to be given this equipment by their employer, or their employer is legally liable for it.
Yeah, and
so
we have a Edwina.
Totally
We have Edwina saying that this nurse should take it up with the management. Well, it's the management who are crying out for it. You know, and it's not the management, it's the government. We need to hold the government.
I'll tell you what we'll do, Teresa.
Government.
We need to
stop playing politics, Edwina,
Teresa.
and start facing. In reality, would Edwina walk into one of those hospitals? Would
Teresa,
she?
stay there for me. Hold on,
No.
Teresa, listen to me,
Hang
please.
on,
Hold on, Edwina, hold on.
Let her respond.
Hold on, please.
Go ahead.
Wait 1 second. I'd like you to stay there, Teresa, if you can, because I want to give you time to speak to Edwina tonight. But I want to head to America first, and then I'll give you both time to talk to each other. Because in the United States, let's have a look at the United States. Our correspondent Peter Bowes is waiting for us. And we can look, for example, at the state of New York, which has reported its biggest one-day jump in fatalities so far. There were 630 new deaths, taking the total to more than 3,500 in New York alone. The state's governor, Andrew Cuomo, has said the worst is yet to come. Meanwhile, President Trump has held yet another extraordinary news conference about face masks this time. The president has warned manufacturers he will be tough if he doesn't get what he wants when he wants it.
FEMA and HHS have ordered 180 million, think of that, 180 million. Who ever heard of 180 million N95 masks? And we're working now with 3M to see whether or not that all works out, but we want them to help our country. And I think it's going to be okay. We're going to soon let you know. But we need the masks. We don't want other people getting it. That's why we're instituting a lot of Defense Production Act. You could call it retaliations, because that's what it is. It's a retaliation. If people don't give us what we need for our people, we're going to be very tough, and we've been very tough.
And he insisted that the shutdown could not continue indefinitely.
Let me be extremely clear about one point. We will move heaven and earth to safeguard our great American citizens. We will continue to use every power, every authority, every single resource we've got to keep our people healthy, safe, secure, and to get this thing over with. We want to finish this war. We have to get back to work. We have to open our country again. We have to open our country again. We don't want to be doing this for months and months and months. We're going to open our country again. This country wasn't meant for this. Few were. But we have to open our country again.
Well, let's speak to our correspondent who's in America tonight, Peter Bowes. Peter, I can hear the president's frustration about getting the country open, but that will be determined surely by the advice that he will get, or you would like to think it will be determined by the advice that he will get from his senior medical advisors as to when it's safe to do so.
You would think. And it was an unusual, maybe not unusual, it was a striking news conference because he kept returning to that theme over and over again, how the country had to get back to normalcy, how people had to get out of their homes and get to work. He talked about sports stadiums being full of fans again, about church congregations, and I think, kind of reading between the lines a little bit of what he was saying, he's still hoping, I think, that by Easter maybe church congregations can gather outside while still social distancing. He said how sad it was that people had to watch church services on a computer. So he is still expressing this, very openly expressing this frustration that the country is at a standstill. And of course, everyone's frustrated that it's at a standstill, but at the same time, and almost in the same breath, talking about the fact that there's going to be a lot of death, a very deadly period over the next couple of weeks, talking about how bad it is in New York City, and getting into this debate about ventilators again and the seemingly different opinions between state governors and the federal government in terms of the availability of ventilators.
Yeah. And let's talk about some of the strategizing that President Trump's administration might be now doing, because with the shortage of ventilators, Peter, many commentators have been noticing how he's changing some of the language on government federal websites so that it appears that it has always been the responsibility of individual states to have an adequate supply of ventilators, and that the federal government are only there as a backup. And that's the narrative that he's been very much pushing, both in his press conference. Certainly, I haven't seen tonight's, but he was pushing that big time last night.
He was, and we heard a little bit of that again over the last couple of hours. And you're right, it comes down to, everyone always says words matter, it comes down to the language. And whether, and it was Jared Kushner, one of his close colleagues, looking at the distribution of ventilators, referring to our. And President Trump asked to explain what he meant by our. Was he talking about the federal government, our ventilators? President Trump said actually he meant our in terms of the country and all of our states. And it goes into a minutiae that makes it actually very difficult to really understand what the policy is. And as you say, the emphasis between what was always meant to be in terms of a federal government stockpile versus what the individual states are supplying and whose responsibility lies where. It really is, the devil is in the detail in terms of what they're trying to explain. But I think as far as the American public is concerned, they just want to know that their local hospitals have got enough ventilators during this terrible time. And I don't think it really gives us much clarity listening to these ongoing debates at these different news conferences.
You mentioned New York, and there are some harrowing scenes coming out of New York. Elmhurst Hospital in New York, not too far away from where President Trump grew up, actually, with these freezer lorries sitting outside the back of the hospitals with corpses being loaded onto them.
They're just horrendous scenes, and you describe it well, that these vehicles are being pulled up almost like delivery trucks that you would see outside a supermarket, just waiting there for the body bags, often taken in the front loader of a bulldozer, and put into these vehicles. And then, of course, we now know that the next stage is a funeral where relatives can't be to say farewell to their loved ones. It's just all a very clinical process that they're going through. Now, by necessity, it's difficult to imagine any other way to do this when people are dying in such huge numbers, and none of these hospitals are used to this kind of situation. So the governor has, as he does these days, goes and has a news conference every single day and talks in very emotional terms about how bad things are and how bad things will continue to be over the next few days and probably weeks. He's talking about the apex, the top of that curve, perhaps coming in a week's time, perhaps coming in 2 weeks' time, when they may eventually begin to see the number of deaths and the number of cases in New York falling.
How many people have died in America so far from the virus, Peter?
There's currently about 8,000 people have died, about 300,000 cases, and those numbers are going up in leaps and bounds over the last few days. And one interesting thing, Stephen, is that, as you know, I'm in Los Angeles in California, and the president mentioned this at the news conference, and local officials have been talking about it as well. In terms of the numbers, only 89 is a lot of people, but only 89 relative to other places have died in Los Angeles. And also the numbers are relatively low in the state of Washington. California and Washington were quite early in introducing social distancing, urging people to stay at home unless they had to go out, and it looks as if in terms of the curve here that we're beginning to see the benefits of that perhaps earlier than some people had expected.
And what's the compliance rate like in America in terms of just the general mood of the population? Are they complying to the social distancing and respecting the advice to stay 2 meters apart, or are the beaches packed at the weekend?
No, they're not. And I've only got anecdotal evidence there in terms of how people are complying. But I would say for the few excursions that I've made in the last few days, people absolutely understand what they have to do. You get supermarkets and it's all painted out on the ground as to where you have to stand to maintain that social distancing. And people are actually very, very cautious about where they stand. Everyone is very well aware of this situation. The beaches are not packed. In fact, a lot of the beaches are closed. A lot of the public parks and playgrounds are closed anyway. But I don't sense any desire of people to want to go to these places. I think that the message really has got through.
Just two more questions, Peter, and then we'll go to the news. So you've got this, it seems to me, tell me if I'm right or if I'm reading this wrong, that you've got this tension then between a president that very much thinks that it will be electorally beneficial to him to be saying this country will be open very, very soon. And then he's flanked at those press conferences by medical advisors. Fauci is a household name now. He's one of the most senior medical advisors that do not think that the country can open anytime soon. Am I reading that right?
Yes, and there's a lot of diplomatic language when you hear those medical experts talked about their aspirations. They really don't want to focus on talking about getting the country open again. They just repeatedly come back to this. And I think we probably saw it more in the news conference that's just happened over the last couple of hours. Focus more on that message that it's what we do here and now, today and tomorrow and the next day, in terms of social distancing, not going out unless we absolutely have to, that is going to determine the fate of what happens in the next couple of weeks. And that is how they deal with that situation when you've got reporters at the White House throwing these questions that clearly you've got to acknowledge from some outlets are designed to maybe trip up the president because he has said one thing and, well, let's see what the medical expert says here. And there is, you can see it in their faces and their expressions, the level of diplomacy that they have to come up with to get through these discussions. In terms of the president and his electoral chances come the election in November, which he continues to insist will go ahead as normal, that is almost the unspoken issue that even White House reporters are not delving into, but does this mean so-and-so for your chances if you do this or if you take that action? Clearly it is the subplot to a lot of what the president is thinking. That is very obvious, and especially when he talks about the American economy, which was booming just a month ago and has now just been completely destroyed in terms of the high figures that Wall Street was meeting.
I read also, Peter, that some White House insiders were suggesting that the president is spending so much time at these press conferences. He's sometimes standing there for over an hour taking questions every night, and sometimes it pushes into 2 hours, because he thinks that those press conferences are becoming prime time viewing. And for anybody that doubts that might be the case, he actually likened the ratings for those press conferences to his reality TV shows. He, as the President of the United States, said that out loud.
It's sometimes breathtaking, and he absolutely does that. He and these press conferences are generally timed for what's known as prime time viewing in the States, a little bit later, obviously, on the East Coast as it is here in the West. But a lot of people are watching. Yes, he has talked about the viewing figures, comparing them with the most popular reality shows. And it, for a lot of people, leaves an incredibly bad taste. And he did it today. He's done it before, when after about an hour and a half, he looks at the reporters and essentially says, any more questions, every hand goes up, because that's what reporters do. If the president is inviting them to ask another question, they do. And almost reacts with some amazement that they want to keep on going. But then he keeps on going and keeps on going and keeps on going. And these things can go to actually more than 2 hours sometimes. And they get off subject. They even venture into the impeachment trial. That they'll cover issues that are completely irrelevant to what's happening right now. And I think the president, to some extent, is aware of that, because today he got off subject and then actually checked himself and said, but let's bring an end to that, because it's essentially not what people want to hear about. So I think he is aware to some extent of how it looks.
Peter Bose, thanks very much indeed. That's Peter Bose for us from Los Angeles this evening. Okay, Teresa in Bristol, we promised we would let you speak to Edwina Curry, who's with us tonight, as is Mohammed Shafiq. Teresa, you've got Edwina on the other line. Say good evening to her and away you go.
Oh, hello, Edwina.
Hello.
Well, I'm following on from what I was talking about earlier, the fact that I really believe the government has failed our NHS staff.
Are you a member? Do you work for the NHS?
No, I don't. But I care deeply about many people that work for the NHS.
And why do you think the government has failed, Teresa? Let's sum this up and then we'll
Well, basically, I feel the government has failed because on the 23rd of January, China built its first hospital in 5 days. And on the 6th of February, it built its second hospital in 1 week. Yeah?
It didn't. No, it didn't. Don't exaggerate.
Okay, no, it built 2 hospitals. One that could cope with about 5,000 patients, and one that could cope with 1,600. Is that right?
It took them more than 10 days to do that.
Okay, well, however long it took.
Don't exaggerate.
I'm not exaggerating. I thought it was 5 days.
Well, you're
right. Well, let's get. Sorry. No matter how many days it was, let's just talk about the bigger point. Let's address the bigger point.
The point I'm trying to make is that China did that to protect its staff, okay? Knowing what this virus was going to do. And if you look at the China curve, you see that China only loses less than 150, even at the worst time, China was losing 150 people a day because they contained it. Now, anybody who, even somebody like myself who's not trained or anything, I saw the footage and I saw them spraying down the streets, and I saw the way that the staff were fully protected with their PPE and how they dealt with the patients. And these 2 hospitals going up, surely that would have been money well spent. If our government had done something like that in the early days, we wouldn't be approaching 600, 700, and like France, 1,000 deaths a day. And the problem now...
Let me answer that. Let me deal with two or three issues at a time. The first that's really worth realising is that countries like China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore went through the misery of SARS when they had thousands dead. So they didn't have to go through the whole business of trying to understand what the virus was going to be like or how it could go whizzing through, particularly urban populations that are on public transport a lot, like we found in London, like they found in New York. They didn't have to go through that psychological shift to believing that this was going to happen. They were already
a government knows what happens in other countries in the world. We could learn from that too.
All right. The second thing is it's rubbish to suggest that China built hospitals in 5 days. And anyone that looks these things up and you can actually see it and the way it was done, we've done exactly that, creating the new facility at Excel. We have done that from scratch.
The bigger point of being is the PPE equipment.
No,
the lack of it.
I'm just dealing with one subject at the moment.
And the fact that the
NHS. Can I answer the question that I've been asked, please?
Okay. All right. Let's get to the PPE equipment because that's the material point.
I've been asked about China and all the rest of it. China has kept its citizens in by welding bars across their doors. There's plenty of that on social media. It's very difficult to see exactly how much we can believe from China. It is a total command economy, and you have to be a little bit careful about assuming that everything China's done is right and everything we have done is wrong. Not least because actually we've done much of what you want right now. Nearly 400 million pieces
I'm
of
more
equipment
interested
have been released.
To the PPE equipment
that's
and
exactly
the lack
what I'm
of it
talking
for our
about.
nurses.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Nearly 400 million.
It's good.
Hold on, no, we're not going to shout over each other. Let's let Edwina deal with it.
Nearly 400 million pieces of personal protective equipment have been delivered through the NHS in the last 2 weeks. That's FFP3 masks, surgical masks, other PPE equipment, not only to the NHS, but to 58,000 healthcare settings, including your GP and pharmacies and community providers. There are a lot of other people besides hospitals who need this.
Don't you think it's slightly late? We're now April. This was happening in January.
This was happening in March.
Can I finish? We had a report in 2016 where we knew exactly how to equip ourselves, as far as I understand. So why did we have that report? We had that report exactly for the reason that you said a moment ago, SARS. We had the report because we were expecting this. We wanted to prepare for it. But for some reason, this government hasn't prepared for it. And for another reason, our NHS has been on its knees in the past 10 years from all the lack of funding. So we've had all of the information there for us to prepare for it, but they haven't. And now, instead of in January, when we saw it exploding in China, we're now in April and we still haven't got the protective equipment for our employees. And the reason why I feel so strongly about this, Edwina, is because, first of all, I know that some countries took the herd approach. And
still are. And still are. Sweden still is.
Advocated by some senior members of the Conservative Party.
I have a big concern about the herd approach, which seems to be what Italy, Spain, France, UK and America tried to do, but now they're actually rethinking it. And the reason they're rethinking it is because we don't know whether people will actually build up an immunity or whether they'll get it once and then they'll get it a second time.
Well, can I
just wear their systems out?
I want to know. I'm sorry. Have you got any background in any of this? I really want to know. It's too irrelevant.
I don't want this.
We've got
I don't want this. Hold on.
Experts all over the place here.
Hold on. I don't want this also to descend into these personal insults. Just stop. No. I think we all need to stop. No, Teresa, stop. Teresa, stop. Edwina, stop, please. Hold on. Actually, over recent weeks, we haven't been doing this on this programme. And I think what we need to do is just respect each other and let's not shout at each other. And we're talking about something here where we, of course, got strong opinions. But when Teresa's talking about herd immunity, that was a strategy adopted by some countries. And it is in some countries.
Okay, so Stephen, can I just get in there?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I just get in there? And I think Michael Gove at today's press conference in Downing Street was very clear that it's important for people to be critical of the government, to ask those difficult questions that a caller is asking, and that people in the NHS, as we speak, so you said 21 million, PPE, masks, and whatever else you put out there, but how many PPE equipment is needed on a daily basis? How many nursing homes are not getting their equipment? And it's absolutely right for us to question that. And I think your defensive approach is not very helpful.
Do you know the other thing I noticed? Teresa, we'll say thank you to you, and thank you so much for calling us.
Thank you.
The other thing I noticed, by the way, that I didn't know until today, and it's been out there and I've missed it. The deaths, the numbers of deaths that the government is reporting each day associated with coronavirus does not include those people who are dying within care homes
with
coronavirus.
It includes some.
It includes those people who have been in hospital.
Well, no, it includes some because I think at least one of the other countries, I can't remember whether it's Scotland or Wales, they include some. And what they are about to do...
In England it doesn't.
Shush, well, just a minute. If you look, all this stuff is on the government website, so I'm not inventing it.
Sure.
From what they're going to do is weekly on Tuesdays, they will publish a list that shows people perhaps who've died at home. Anybody, they're going to look at all the death certificates, and even when there's a mention or a suspicion of COVID-19, those numbers will be published.
But they haven't up to now, is my point.
They started it last week. And the process of collection. It's a process of collection. It's published on Tuesdays, so they're only going to do it once a week. Not least because the figures can be so erratic from day to day, and if you're looking at it seriously, then you want to have some kind of consistency. Now that is going to push up the numbers of deaths very, very sharply. The ones we are certain of are the people who are in hospital and have been tested. Most of whom, of course, thank God, come home.
Yeah, and that's why...
That begs the question, and I'm sorry, I do want to move on to this, but that very much begs the question. If some of our most vulnerable people are elderly people in care homes, why were we not testing them? Why were they not being treated until they got to the deterioration, the point of deterioration with their health that they had to go into hospital? What has been the strategy around protecting elderly people in care homes?
Well, that is a very good question. I think it probably varies from from provider to provider. I had one provider getting on to me during the week, not many miles from where I live, saying that their staff were having to queue up to shop for food for the residents in Tesco. I absolutely blew up. I said, don't you use wholesalers? What do you do most of the time? Well, some of these places are not well run.
We've been hearing, Mohammed, I'll give you a shout in a second.
Sure.
We've been hearing about the situation in care homes already on the programme tonight. Let's have a listen to Anita Astle, who was on earlier. Anita owns and runs the Wren Hall nursing home in Selston in Nottinghamshire. I asked her if she and her staff were getting hold of the equipment that they need to do their job safely.
No, we've been really struggling to access masks. We're all right for gloves and aprons, but it's been really stressful and extremely worrying trying to source the masks so that our staff can have the right equipment to look after those that are showing symptoms.
So what does that mean on a daily basis? Struggling to get masks? Are you just about got enough masks, or have your staff been walking around residents without them, Anita?
No, so, I mean, the guidance is that we use the masks when we're caring for people showing symptoms, and currently we've got 9 people with symptoms. The guidance for masks changed on Friday or Thursday night, Friday morning. Up until then, we were using any mask that we had was single use only, so that once you went into somebody, delivered their care, you had to remove your mask and the gloves and aprons, and then use fresh for the next person. The guidance just changed so that you can now keep a mask on for a session of care. That means you can now care for a number of people within a time frame, and you can keep that mask on. Now, to be honest,
how does that make sense?
Well, it is worrying because has the guidance changed just because there's a shortage of the masks rather than it actual having efficacy behind it? And at the moment, we don't know, but we just have to go with it. It does mean that instead of us using 364 masks in a 24-hour period, we go down to 94 masks, which is a huge drop for us, and it means that we're not getting through the supply that we were. But, you know, one of the problems that we're having is that some suppliers are being really unscrupulous. I purchased 3,100 with £8,860. That lasted me 8 days. So for a day...
Sorry, for how many masks?
3,150.
Yeah.
It lasted me 8 days at a cost of £1,107 a day.
What would they normally be?
These masks are, what, 40p, 50p normally?
Well, it's ridiculous, isn't
and
it?
we were paying £2.74. You know,
so the cost of those masks has gone up about 6-fold?
To us, yes.
Mohammed?
Well, I think this is part of the problem. You know, we have a government that is claiming that all this PPE equipment is out there on the front line and it's being delivered. But we have numerous examples, not just on your show, but on many other broadcasts on social media, you know, frontline staff saying that they don't have the equipment. And asking the question of the government is, where is that equipment? What is happening? There's a story in the newspapers around America, the United States government, you know, tripling the payments, you know, from Germany and other countries. And so there is, you know, there's lots of things that needs to happen. But I think, you know, 2 very important things as we head in towards our peak 10 days. One is around making sure that the equipment is available and is delivered and that, you know, that is speeded up. And secondly, we've utterly failed on testing, you know, frontline staff, NHS staff, the ambulance service, the emergency services, care workers. You know, I could go on this endless. you look at Germany and the testing that they've done in huge numbers, and I think that's where the government needs to step up. And, all of us are praying for the government. We want the best. We know that the government are doing the best that they can. I don't want to get political, but I think asking the right questions is very important.
Here's Dax in Hartlepool. Hello, Dax.
Hi, guys.
Go ahead, sir. Thanks for calling.
As a regular citizen, I want my government to play it absolutely straight, tell me what's going on.